You are listening to Amplify Your Success Podcast, episode 165. And today I'm joined by a guest all the way from France to share what she's learned about protecting your company's most important brand assets. You ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Amplify Your Success Podcast. Hey, are you a thought leader, creative entrepreneur, or change maker and want to magnify your impact? Boost influence while creating a financial abundance? Stay tuned for today's inspiring episode with your host, Melanie Benson.
Hey there, inspired entrepreneurs and business leaders. It's your host, Melanie Benson here, profit amplifier to expertpreneurs who want to have a much bigger impact, and why not get some more income in the process, right? So today I'm joined by a guest who's going to talk about something really important about protecting your company's brand assets. And before I jump in and introduce you to her, I thought I'd give you a little personal side note on this topic. I've been in business 20 years, and I cannot tell you how many times I've discovered that someone has swiped one of my best performing lead magnets. They've taken like an entire digital program and they're selling it on their site. It's amazing what people will do. And there's only one way to protect yourself, and that's to make sure you have the proper intellectual property marks and get all of your ducks in a row before it happens. And I know a lot of you are bootstrapping. I know that you want to maybe test it out before you go through all the financial investment in getting these things done. But I want you to think about what it costs to have to go and fight to protect your hard work versus doing it in advance. So this is a really important piece of the puzzle for a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners and service providers, and yet you're skipping it. So I'm hoping that today's interview will shed some light on some really simple things you can do to protect yourself right away. Now, funny side note, one of the things that I actually infringed on someone else's trademark, and I didn't even know it, but I had someone send me a very nice letter and let me know. When I launched it, it wasn't in any violation because we do all that research, but somewhere along the way, this concept got so popular, someone grabbed a trademark, and I was like, oh, lesson learned again. But I thought I would share it with you because it's one of my best downloads. It's the most popular one that we've had up to date. It just continues to get downloaded at record speed. And I'm pretty sure that's how they ran across it because, it's everywhere. And that is my top 10 ways to create cash on demand, creating a revenue rush. And you can find it at yourrevenuerush.com. Yes, that is the rebranded version because the other one got trademarked. So that was a big pain in the butt to have to go through and re-trademark everything and reframe things. But what was really cool about it is in the end, we actually found a more aligned name that fits better in my overall branding scheme. So, it always works out in the end, but it was an extra cost and it was a lot extra work. But tell me what you think. Go download yourrevenuerush.com and check out these top 10 ways that I personally have used, I've used with my clients to create more revenue when I need it the most, or just some great ideas to how to kick up the revenue a little bit more this year. Now, let's get into today's episode. Have you ever had that moment when you have worked so hard to create this amazing program? You've put blood, sweat, and tears into a product, and you notice someone else is starting to use the same language, the same branding, the same wording, the same delivery, and you're crushed. That's why knowing how to protect your company is so critical as an entrepreneur, online business owner, anyone who's putting something out for the world to see. Today's guest is going to help us understand how to protect our company so we don't have that dreaded intellectual property moment of someone grabbing our information. Audrey Dauvet is the host of Branded New, a podcast of the International Trademark Association. Mrs. Dauvet is a French-born lawyer, intellectual property and technology consultant, and an entrepreneur based in the United States and France. Her career has included serving as global intellectual property director of the leading wine and spirits company, Pernod Ricard, Paris, France, where she implemented its anti-counterfeiting programs in key markets. And let me tell you, entrepreneurs, this is really the people that you want to listen to who have already done it. Now, Mrs. Dauvet holds an LLM DESS, which I'm going to have to ask her about, in industrial property law, Sorbonne Law School, Paris, and a master's degree in economy and finance from the Paris Institute of Political Studies. She has also been a part of a leadership executive program at INSEAD. Now, Audrey, I have to tell you, I'm so intrigued by all of these credentials, but let's bottom line it. What really matters is in the trenches learning, being able to do this for companies. You've been trying to spread the word. You've got a new podcast that you host. And this is what so many entrepreneurs struggle with, is taking the right steps at the right time to protect the work they spend thousands of dollars and hours preparing. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Melanie. Thanks for having me.
And you're actually calling in from France today, right? Where are you at in France?
Yeah, absolutely. In Paris.
And is it cold? Is it beautiful sunny today?
It's not so cold compared to what it is usually. No, it's pretty nice.
Okay. Before we dig into all the ins and outs of this, I'm fascinated by how people get into this line of work. Did you always know this is where you wanted to specialize, or did you come to this specialty through some kind of a windy path?
I had a lot of dreams when I was a student, and I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a lawyer. I even wanted to be a cook. So for me, it was very difficult to choose, and I've been, a lawyer for the last 20 years. But it was also nice to try other things, and the podcast for me is a new horizon. And you mentioned that I am an entrepreneur. I'm actually an entrepreneur in the beverage industry, after spending almost 10 years for one of the leaders in the wine and spirits industry. And it's a way for me to use my, let's say, cooking credentials. So it's the first step is, we only live once. And it's also about, the dreams that you want to come true.
So it's kind of a different animal, if you will, being a cook versus being a lawyer. What was it that was the linchpin that caused you to go towards law versus going after cooking?
Oh, that's a very good question. I loved both. So for me, it was always clear that one day I would do one thing, and I would start with the other. So there was not necessarily a logic, but I would say that it's also the opportunities that you see in your life that you cannot really anticipate. And I met the good people at the good moment for each of these passions.
I love that. Well, I always say that if I had to start all over again, I would either be a stylist or a chef. So I had a lot of those variety career paths as well. So you landed in law, and today you're helping people protect their intellectual property and understand trademarking. And so why do you think it's so critical that entrepreneurs, online business owners, people who maybe are bootstrapping to get their businesses off the ground, protect their trademarks from the get-go?
It's essential for entrepreneurs to safeguard their investment and transform their innovation potential and creativity into market value and competitiveness. For my part, I have used from day one the intellectual property rights I considered relevant to protect my creations, my brand, etc. And I know that when you own IP, when you register your trademark, when you protect your inventions or your creations, it helps create a very important, I would say, an essential differentiator for your venture. And when I was an IP lawyer, I witnessed so many problems uh, because some entrepreneurs were among my clients. And all these problems, or many of these problems, could have been avoided by protecting earlier and better their intellectual property. So you will probably tell me, Melanie, that it can be very expensive for newcomers and for startups to invest in intellectual property. But it's also key to envisage IP in a strategic way with a set of priorities and a clear identification of their what we call intangible assets, depending on their goals. For instance, you could start applying for a local or a regional trademark, let's say at the European level. And as the business scales up, you can have a more international strategy.
So I know one of the things that gets in the way for a lot of business owners is this idea of return on investment, right? Like, what do I need to do
Mm-hmm.
right now that's going to have the greatest impact? But I want to tell a personal story because I think when we think about like, how do I really need to do this? Maybe someone's testing a concept and they're not really sure it's going to take off. There's a lot of things that go through an entrepreneur's mind as they're starting up a new offering or starting up a new business. Well, I can just say I had a very interesting experience with this several times. I've had people steal my concepts, and if it wasn't for the trademarks I had, I probably would have lost, like in the beginning, a lot of things around my Build Your Dream Team programs. But
Mm-hmm.
not too long ago, I was testing a program called Money DNA, which I know many of our listeners have taken. It's a money mindset program. And I saw a colleague of mine start using my word money DNA, which is a word that, it's not out there. And I
Mm-hmm.
called her out on it. And I had started the trademarking process, but I had not finished it. And I said, we're trademarking this. And she fought me on it because it wasn't trademarked. So what is the right time if someone's in that? I'm not sure this is going to be a big offering. I'm not sure this is going to go anywhere. What's the right time for someone to, like get that trademarking process started?
I would say it's a really a case by case, on a case by case basis. I would not say one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about the confidence you have in your project, and the little, because the investment may not be necessarily big, in the sense, as I said earlier, that if you want to apply, if you think that it's relevant to apply for a trademark, you can just invest in the territory, in the country that makes the most sense for you, for your initial market, and you can expand it over time if it grows and if it becomes bigger. And if you protect in one country, for instance, if you protect a brand in the US, the cost is not so deterrent. I would even say that it's probably worth the investment.
Yeah. And you bring up a great point about global companies, right? Because I think, again, a lot of entrepreneurs, people who are building a business around their expertise, they're thinking kind of small, right? But the whole reason
Mm-hmm.
I started Amplify Your Success is I want people to start thinking bigger. I want them to start thinking bolder. I want them to start thinking more global. Because whether you realize it or not, with the internet the way it is, like we could have a global business in a nanosecond, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do
Mm-hmm.
we have to think about when we start to realize that we may be growing a global business, not just a local business or an American or Canadian or whatever our local country is?
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of challenges when building your own business, but the greatest challenge for me when you become international, it's to have the good advisors. So, because you cannot pretend to know, the laws of each and every country where you want to develop. So there are cultural differences, there are legal differences, regulatory differences, social differences, economic differences, and that's where you will find the confidence to grow your business outside your initial country. Um, so, of course, regarding intellectual property, I would invite the entrepreneurs who want to develop their business outside their country to have a discussion with an intellectual property counsel who will advise them on what they can do, where they can protect in the most optimal way their intangible assets, so their creations, their inventions, their brands, and see where they can gain some confidence. And but I would say I can go even outside the legal world. For me, when you plan to develop your business outside your country, I would say that the biggest challenge is to build a team. And people is the most essential and invaluable asset. And when growing a global business today, and that's my experience, you have to be effective at tailoring recruitment, training, development processes, um, and people should understand the market concerns and how to face local realities of this new market. And among local realities, you have intellectual property.
Other interesting thing about growing your business and having a team, a lot of people are hiring from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and yet they don't necessarily look at the agreements they have with those team members and how they are with their intellectual property, how they are with the sensitive parts of their business. How would you advise someone who's hiring, who maybe works in America, but is hiring people from the Philippines or India? Is there anything we have to think about in terms of protecting our assets and having, team agreements that support us?
Definitely. Having first, you pronounce the good word, agreements. We need to have contracts. And in the contracts, we need to think about, for instance, non-disclosure agreements. We need to think about, a full bunch of provisions that protect the company. But I would say that beyond the legal part and the contractual part, bringing in great people with the right skills onto the team or early on is one of the toughest parts of launching a business. And after you lock in the core team, making your first few hires are critical in terms of shaping the culture and getting your future leaders in place. And it takes way longer and it's way harder to do well than I ever realized before I set out to do it. And I would also add that in this international context, you need to overhaul business practices, and it includes what we said about legal compliance regulations and even tax. So it's, I would say, a whole spectrum of things you need to think about when you develop internationally.
Talking about the leadership side of it, because I have a great passion for leadership. As a small business, we still lead. We if we're impacting and influencing the actions in others, we're leading. What I think has been one of your like secrets or one of your strategies to finding this kind of talent? Like I know you've had a lot of on the ground experience around this, and I think our listeners could maybe who maybe been hesitant to hire might really gain benefit from your knowledge and wisdom.
Oh, thank you. I still make. I'm still learning.
Aren't we
And
all?
yes, definitely. So I'm very humble regarding recruitments. I always make a strong word to understand the culture of the country where I plan to develop my business. It's really about understanding and taking the time to get, the cultural specificities, and for, for me, it's a prerequisite. So I would say that's probably very basic as an advice. But before recruiting, you have to adjust. You have to adapt. It's not, I would say that it's not the contrary. It's not the person you want to recruit that will, you know, that will completely adapt to the culture of your company, because you develop in his or her country. So if you want to grow, if you want to develop your business in this country, you have to understand the rationale, the culture, and everything around, and respect, of course, to get the good people on board.
Yeah. I'll interject. One of my great learnings around leadership and hiring has been to the old adage, hire slowly. I'm not a fan of
Yeah.
firing quickly unless someone's a real problem, but I do believe we have to really get to know what we really need and really get to know, is that person capable of taking ownership, or are they going to require a lot of hand holding? And that,
Sure.
again, does play into the culture they come from, the training they've had, the experience on the ground, like really getting to know that. That's where we make sure our expectations are met. Because I've worked with entrepreneurs for 20 years now on building teams. And I got to tell you, and I'm sure you see this too, Audrey, people get frustrated first on their expectations not being met. And then, it's really hard to salvage the talent in someone once an owner's mind is made up. So get those expectations
Absolutely.
aligned.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you've actually created an entire podcast to help educate people about building a global business, about law and protecting your business. What was the inspiration behind a podcast around this topic?
The idea was to focus on intellectual property because, as you said at the beginning, it's a topic that people don't necessarily know very well, and it's really a topic that is not limited, should not be limited to experts. It's for everyone, and we wanted to open the discussion about intellectual property and change. And when I say change, it's about the change in our societies, in our economies, in politics, in laws, and how it affects us on a day-to-day basis. We cannot imagine how much IP is there in our day-to-day lives. But when we discuss, for instance, about climate change, intellectual property is there. When we talk about the development of cannabis brands in Canada or in the US, definitely intellectual property is there. When there is a crisis to manage in a company, what about the brand? And so what about the protection of the intellectual property, and so on? So there are multiple, I could even say unlimited areas of topics that are fascinating, and then that can be of interest for a large audience.
So have you had a really big case or big situation that someone maybe didn't take your advice early enough and had to had a big disaster that needed to be cleaned up around intellectual property that you can share about?
Oh, I would say it's about counterfeiting.
Mm.
When you come too late in a country to defend your intellectual property rights, it's a disaster. And I had this experience in an Asian country where the brand I had to defend was not really present, but you could find counterfeits of this brand absolutely everywhere. So imagine, the parasite, the parasite. How to say parasite? um, when you
Parisian, right?
find when you find the wrong product instead of the genuine one, and this wrong product, the counterfeit, has taken so much space that it's not even possible to talk about the real brand, the authentic brand. That's where it's the most difficult challenge, because it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of money.
Yeah, well said. And I know a lot of people don't think about that if they're not a product business, but another version of counterfeiting is when someone's taking your program and then selling it as if it's theirs. And I don't know if you saw this happen, but there's a couple of sites, and I think they're international. Uh, I think they're actually out of the Russian area, but I could be wrong. But there's some sites out there that basically pirate different people's programs. They take the branding and then they sell them on their own sites, or they give them away. And it was a really popular thing that was happening for a while. And when we go global, we need that legal support that you offer to help us address those things sometimes, because some people couldn't get them to take their product out of that pirating scheme until their lawyers approached them. So we need people
Absolutely.
like you, Audrey. Thank you for doing what you're doing out there in the world. As we start to wrap up, I always have a fun question I like to ask my guests. But before we do that, let's tell everybody where they can find out about your association and the podcast that you run, and how people can find out more and go deeper into the legal support you have.
Thank you. Sure. So to listen to my podcast, you can go to INTA.org. So that's the International Trademark Association producing the podcast. And the name of this podcast is Brand and You. And all contacts are on the website. And also, if I may, I would like to share a very exciting news. Because we are bringing the world's largest and most influential gathering of intellectual property professionals in the world. And it will happen in Asia in April, between the 25th and the 29th this year. So in Singapore, precisely. And the registration opens now. So it's a very interesting and very relevant occasion, even for entrepreneurs, to know more about intellectual property and what is happening in this ecosystem.
I love it. And you're a perfect example of following something that you're really passionate about and seeing a need in the world, and then building a global empire around it, which I just love. We're actually going to be doing a whole series soon on Amplify about how she or he built an empire, because I think a lot of people they just don't know what the strategy is to get that out there in the world. So I like to wrap up my episodes by asking you, going back to more of the personal side and your own trajectory, your own growth. What do you think is the boldest move you've had to make to amplify your results?
Hmm.
I know you're probably thinking everything's been bold up to now, right?
It's a good question, because as I mentioned earlier, I have different hats.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's about working to understand your customers.
Say more about that, because this is a very critical piece of business success, and a lot of people don't understand this.
Yes. Excuse me, do you want me to develop
Yes,
more?
I say more about it because a lot of people don't
Oh, yeah,
really understand this piece, but I think it's the foundation of all great success in business.
absolutely. When you have uh, we talked earlier about international markets and having a development outside your own country. when you've been in a local market for a while, it can be tough to find new customers. They are used to your products, and your competitors and new sales can be a battle art fought. So finding new customers and working hard to make it happen for the development of your business, for me, it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what many people struggle with, is how to find those customers. So make sure that you dig deep and really look at, are you protecting your company? Are you protecting your assets? Are you protecting your relationships with your team members and clients? These are really important pieces of the puzzle. And what we don't want, and I know this is what Audrey stands for, is what we don't want is for you to be plugging along and then all of a sudden get massively derailed because you've got to invest thousands of dollars in legal support to go fight a battle to protect something you should own. So do it now, like do it in the beginning. Audrey's here to support you. And you can find out more at INTA.org, listen into her podcast, grab some of her free legal resources. Audrey, thank you so much for joining me today. As we leave the show, is there one last parting piece of wisdom you'd like to share with everyone?
I think, Melanie, you just said it. Protect your IP, protect your intellectual property. It really makes the difference.
Yeah, it does.
On a short term and on a long term basis, definitely.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. And be sure to join us in the Amplify Your Success community. And I'm going to be taking a poll as this episode airs. Have you trademarked and protected your current programs and offerings? And if not, I want to hear why. Let's have a conversation. Let's make sure you're getting the right things in place so you have the strength to grow and amplify those results. This is Melanie Benson, your host. Thanks so much for listening in today. If you want to catch up on any of the show notes and circle back on any of the resources we shared in today's show, head on over to the show page at amplifyyoursuccesspodcast.com. And remember, you amplify your results faster when you're in a community of other people who are moving and shaking. Join us at amplifyyoursuccesscommunity.com. One last thing. When you've gained insight from today's episode, help us share that and inspire other people by heading over to iTunes, subscribing, and give it a review. iTunes absolutely loves seeing these reviews pop up, and it actually helps boost my show's visibility. So I would be super grateful for your reviews. And as always, I love seeing your shares of these episodes on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Come find me over there. Tag me in your shares. I'll give you some social media love right back. So see you next week for another inspiring episode of Amplify Your Success Podcast.